Krishnan, what we know now is that 10 foreign prisoners of war, including 5 Britons, captured here in Ukraine by the Russians, have now been released. This photograph has just come out, which shows them landing in Saudi Arabia, because it was the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman who apparently negotiated their release. Now, the man in the orange T-shirt is believed to be Sean Pinner, and Aidan Aslin is also there in the photograph. Now, Aidan, both of those men were fighting in Mariupol and were captured by Russian forces in April, and they were held, and there was a lot of distress amongst their families because they were shown on Russian television. They appeared to be in a very bad state. There was a lot of concern that Aidan Aslin might have been beaten and badly treated. There was a lot of worry about it. So their families will be delighted that certainly Aidan Aslin and hopefully Sean Pinner have also been released, as well as 2 Americans, a Swede and a Moroccan. So what we see today is President Putin acting as both good cop and bad cop. Good cop in the sense of allowing the release of these foreign prisoners of war. Bad cop in the sense of threatening nuclear war, because that's what he did this morning. What he is saying is that foreign support for Ukraine, particularly military support, the provision of weapons, which will be used to attack Russian forces, will be seen as a NATO attack on Russia, because what he plans to do is annex the territory which is Ukrainian, but which is now occupied by Russian forces. So that, as you can imagine, is a message that didn't go down well internationally or here in Ukraine.
Russian rockets can land anywhere in Ukraine. Today, President Putin threatened to use even more deadly weapons.
Граждане России могут быть уверены, территориальная целостность нашей Родины, наша независимость и свобода будут обеспечены. Подчеркну это еще раз. Всеми имеющимися у нас средствами. А те, кто пытаются шантажировать нас ядерным оружием, должны знать, что роза ветров может развернуться и в их сторону.
As Russian forces find themselves on the back foot in Ukraine, the nuclear threat is designed to deter NATO from continuing to arm the Ukrainians and to suggest that Ukraine is just a front for Western aggression.
Коллективный Запад во главе с Соединенными Штатами Америки продолжает военно-политический курс на сдерживание Российской Федерации и ее союзников, проводит агрессивную политику путем оказания помощи и всесторонней поддержки вооруженным силам Украины, в том числе прямыми поставками различных видов вооружения и боеприпасов.
The aim is to accuse the West of attacking Russia, as occupied Ukrainian territory will be annexed after staged referendums, a move praised by Russian state television.
Теперь на Западе понимают, что нападение Украины на эти земли, да еще и с использованием западного оружия, в частности американского, любого другого, будет рассматриваться как нападение на Россию со всеми абсолютно вытекающими последствиями.
This morning we found Ukrainian soldiers heading for the front, unimpressed by the Russian announcement that 300,000 reserve troops would be mobilized for the war.
Положим більше, чорнозем буде краще, урожай лучший. І вам добре, і нам хорошо. Зброю давайте. Хаммерси.
People whose village was recently retaken by Ukrainian forces after 5 months under Russian occupation were equally scathing about President Putin's threats.
Слава Україні!
Слава Україні!
Він уже все йому, він уже своє, хай йому нема ні від Бога, ні від людей прощення, немає, не буде і ніколи, хай він там здохне, ну його нагад. Не хочеться за нього взагалі слухати навіть, вірите, не хочеться, не хочеться. Не хочеться і все.
Over the border in Moscow and several other Russian cities, people defied the authorities to protest. They shouted, "No to war" and "Save our children." For 7 months, they've been told that this was a special military operation, not that they might have to fight in Ukraine.
Я не боюсь. Я уже ничего не боюсь.
Such protests are banned and likely to be crushed. Russia's most famous political prisoner was in court today and able to give his view.
Уже сейчас понятно главное, что то преступление, та преступная война, которая идет, преступная агрессивная война, она усугубляется, углубляется, и в это во все Путин пытается вмешать как можно больше людей. Он хочет замазать в этой крови сотни тысяч людей и...
Ukraine has suffered so much damage to its physical infrastructure, so many lives lost, soldiers and civilians. But ruined Russian armour litters the landscape. Putin's new plan is no guarantee of Russian success.
Well, I think that you can hear the air raid siren behind me, and that shows that this war is very present, even here in Kharkiv, which has been pretty quiet in recent days. The day after tomorrow, we're expecting referendums to take place in 4 of the territories that Russia occupies. And what is likely to happen there is that they will overwhelmingly vote to join the Russian Federation, because there's really no choice. That will go down very badly here, and it will go down badly internationally. But what's so interesting is what's happening in Russia. More than 130 people arrested for protesting against Putin's new policy, against mobilization. And those protests are going on even as I speak.
Thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay Hilsum in Kharkiv. Well, earlier, before the news of the prisoner release, I spoke to Mikhail Kasyanov, a former prime minister of Russia, and I began by asking him, although Vladimir Putin says his new strategy is not a bluff, is this a bluff?
In terms of mobilization, it's not a bluff. In terms of potential use of nuclear weapons, I think it's bluff. Mobilization already started, and already there are some facts that men who wanted to leave Russia by airplanes just were already stopped in Russia and didn't allow to leave.
So on the use of nuclear weapons, what do you think he means?
He wanted right now to blackmail the Western leaders, right now, the whole society, Western society. He wants to recognize through these artificial referendums, recognize just occupied part of Ukraine as Russian territory, and to say to the Western leaders that after that, Putin is ready to use nuclear weapons to defend Russian sovereign territory. But I'm very much doubt that Mr. Putin will use nuclear weapon, because just he realized that for the Western leaders, that's the same. Whether there is annexation and recognition, artificial, not recognized by anyone, or just it was the same. The nature of the war would not be changed.
Has he rewritten the nuclear doctrine at all by changing his language from existential threats to Russia to what he's talking about now, which is the territorial integrity of Russia?
He creating a new, I would say, new reasons to create a new territory of Russian Federation, and saying just that will be a new territory which we should defend our new territorial integrity. We understand that Mr. Putin is very nervous. He's on a last stage, I would say, of decision-making process. He has nothing to use.
Are you suggesting that he could lose his position? He could be deposed? And if
Yes,
so, who by?
I feel that by the end of the year, there will be a completely different situation. And today, Mr. Putin announcing just general mobilization, de facto that's general mobilization, although he used the word partial, but to call for general mobilization, Mr. Putin already started the period of his end of his era. Just now, a lot of people who was loyal or neutral to Mr. Putin and his, I would say, just this war, aggressive war, these people would be anger every day. Military potential of Ukrainian army will grow, and they will have a decisive advantage on the battlefield. That would lead to the change of the situation, and I think just to collapse of the Putin's regime. It not will be one time, but it will come shortly.
Are you speculating when you say this, or do you know that there are Russian politicians who have supported Putin who are now questioning his leadership and turning against him?
there will be the loss of, I would say, trust to Mr. Putin, even in any circle. But also the mobilization call for not only middle class officers who is in reserve, but also for other people like soldiers and soldiers. That is from poor families, and these poor families in the remote areas right now support or loyal to Mr. Putin, but they will change their attitude to Mr. Putin.
How do you think Vladimir Putin will end up losing his position?
I think Mr. Putin could somehow just to get out of his position, just nominating some kind of successor. But this successor would not be a real leader of the country. It would be some kind of technical successor for certain period of time, which, of course, would lead to the collapse of the regime. And then inevitably, there will be democratic elections, but it will take time. It will not be tomorrow, not in 6 months, but in 2 years' time. But within that period of time, Mr. Putin leaves somewhere, departs, I don't know, to Baikal Lake resort or something like that, or China.
Mikhail Kasyanov, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I spoke to the Putin-supporting former Russian politician Natalia Narichnitskaya a little earlier, and I began by asking her if the Russian president was really prepared to use nuclear weapons.
No.
He's
I'm
not
sure that
to.
our side is very sober with regard to the preventing universal human calamity and catastrophic for the whole globe. I think it's only when we have no choice that somebody starts this.
But we don't really need to be fearful in London, then.
Well, I'm sure you should not be fearful, of course, with regard to possible Russian attack, although the sentiments in some patriotic radicals is, why not our country bombs, Washington Obcom, which rules Ukrainian regime, and London, these bloody Anglo-Saxons who have always supported all our enemies since, Russia-Persian wars, etc., etc. No, of course, it's just foam of public sentiments.
Why do you think there are not lines of people queuing up to fight, but lines of people trying to get out of the country? Flights are selling out.
But why do you say that? I have no information about that.
Well,
the tickets
flights are selling out.
To Turkey are booked because this is a direction where Russians usually spend in autumn their vacation, because there is a warm sea and there is no closed border. We all go via Turkey to other places.
There's a mad dash to go on holiday.
About the visa, this is the issue of the visa. They fear that, maybe there will be pressure on Turkey, so they would block that.
There are people protesting in the streets about the military operation. Why do you think that is?
As far as I know, the protests are organized by very, very small groups. There are no mass protests. The statistic shows, and I sometimes also participate in polls, that there's about 80% supports this at all. But there are some people, especially some people whose life, work, position is highly dependent on the relations with the Western companies, with Western business, etc. They think more about their own, future, economic and business, etc. And that's why this military operation, which was a milestone in breaking relations with the West, of course, stops their professional life.
How long do you think Putin will be in power? Because some people think he'll be gone within months.
I have the opposite. I think he might stay for a very long time, because we have a Russian proverb that during crossing river, you don't change horses.
Natalia Narchnitskaya, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, now there's been condemnation of the talk of nuclear strikes at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, is there now. Siobhan.
Well, Kathy, all eyes were on the president and what he would say about Russia before President Putin gave his speech this morning, even more so afterwards. And Biden, it was a feisty speech, and he was unequivocal in his condemnation, saying the war was about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist, and that, he said, should make your blood run cold. It was a speech high on rhetoric, but it was not entirely clear what Biden can or will do next. He later met with Prime Minister Liz Truss. She, of course, is due to speak here later this afternoon, and the two committed to stepping up their defence spending. Biden will no doubt put pressure on other world leaders to do the same in private meetings here today. The EU is also under pressure to do more. Ursula von der Leyen walked by me earlier looking very worried indeed. She's talking about more sanctions, and we've just heard that there will be an emergency meeting of EU foreign ministers later today. Well, here's how the day so far has panned out here in New York. Joe Biden had moved his speech at the UN General Assembly to attend the Queen's funeral in London, but it turns out his timing couldn't have been more apt. For hours after hearing Vladimir Putin announce a major escalation of his war in Ukraine, the US president, the biggest financial and military supporter of Ukraine, took to the stage in New York and delivered this sharp rebuttal to the Russian leader.
Brutal, needless war. A war chosen by one man, to be very blunt. A permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invaded its neighbor, attempted to erase a sovereign state from the map. Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the United Nations Charter.
Biden's speech was already squarely aimed at Moscow, but was quickly tweaked after President Putin ordered a mobilization of hundreds of thousands of additional troops and said he backed referendum to annex Ukrainian territory captured by Russia. Aides to the president said they weren't totally surprised by the move, which Biden said was an escalation in Putin's brutal and needless war.
This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state. That should make your blood run cold. This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are. Putin claims he had to act because Russia was threatened. But no one threatened Russia. And no one other than Russia sought conflict.
Biden's words inside the chamber joined a chorus of condemnation against Russia. Speaking to reporters on the fringes of the conference, Germany's Chancellor Scholz said Putin's move to hold referendums would not be tolerated.
The referendums now announced will never be accepted. They cannot, therefore, provide justification for what Russia actually intends, which is to violently conquer a neighboring country.
The stakes for Joe Biden couldn't be any higher. This is the president's first time addressing the General Assembly in person since the pandemic. Biden has already sent $25 billion in economic and military aid to Ukraine, which has been critical to Kyiv's recent success in regaining territory. Ukraine's President Zelensky, who will address the assembly virtually this evening, is now hoping those successes will translate into more money and military equipment from the US and its allies. Enter Britain's Liz Truss. The stakes are high for her too on this, her first major outing on the international stage as Prime Minister, where she'll use her address to reiterate Britain's financial commitment to Ukraine and dismiss Putin's latest move as one of a weakened leader whose war is failing.
President Macron, what's your message to President Putin?
President Macron wouldn't comment yesterday when I asked him about Putin's expected move. But today the French leader said Moscow's escalation would only isolate Putin further. Macron also called for the UN to act now. But therein lies the problem. With Russia a permanent member of the Security Council, it's able to block any move to thwart it. And there's very little Joe Biden or any leader here can seemingly do to stop him.
Well, I've been speaking to the British Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly. I asked him whether he believes President Putin when he says this is not a bluff.
Well, what we have seen throughout this whole conflict is the rhetoric from Vladimir Putin escalating. And we know that he is attempting to have a sham set of referenda in eastern Ukraine. We will highlight the fact that these are illegitimate, they don't represent the will of the Ukrainian people, and we will in no way allow this to be used as an attempt to justify what is an unprovoked and illegal war by Russia in Ukraine.
So Britain's position would be that the Ukrainians should continue to fight, even after those referendums, if they purport to decide that those bits of Ukraine become Russia?
Well, those provinces are Ukrainian. They are part of Ukraine. They voted overwhelmingly to be part of Ukraine. And no sham referendum is going to change those facts. What we are calling for Vladimir Putin to do is to remove Russian forces from Ukrainian territory, to give the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people, the opportunity to rebuild their country, to rebuild their economy. That's what he should do.
Do you believe he is capable of using nuclear weapons?
Well, the actions that he has taken, the things that he is saying are not the actions or the words of someone whose military campaign is being successful. We know, when I was here in February earlier this year, that his original plan was to sweep across Ukraine in a matter of weeks. We are now seeing the Ukrainians push the Russian forces backwards because of the support of the international community, of course, including the United Kingdom.
The nuclear question, though, isn't as simple as either tactical nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles. There's also that question of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. I mean, what is being done to protect that plant from any kind of strike that could release nuclear activity into the atmosphere?
Of course, the priority has got to make sure that we don't see an accident which could have incredibly serious consequences. We want to see military activity moved away from that, including, of course, Russian forces.
What are you doing to talk to the Russians? Do you have a meeting with Lavrov scheduled?
This is an opportunity at the UN, of course, to talk to our friends and allies, including but of course, we also take this opportunity to talk with countries that we disagree with. Our message will be consistent. This aggression is illegitimate, it is unprovoked, and Putin needs to stop.
Your position is very clear that you want them out, but their position today is also quite clear that they regard this as, a proxy war, effectively. Western munitions being used by Ukrainian forces against Russia. This is an opportunity, isn't it? I mean, are you open to meeting Lavrov this week there in New York, where he is, or not?
Well, as I say, the United Nations is about meeting both friends and the countries with whom we are at odds.
But can you answer the specific question?
I'm not going to go into I'm not going to go into details about what my meeting programme is going to be whilst I am here.
Do we have any more British plans to send any more weapons to Ukraine?
Our support for Ukraine is something of which we are very, very proud. And we will continue to speak with the Ukrainians about what more we can do to help them militarily, economically and diplomatically.
Just finally, I just need to ask you briefly. President Biden, obviously, yesterday tweeted about trickle-down economics, about how he was sick of hearing about it. Would you characterise what this government is doing as trickle-down economics?
It's an unprecedented set of circumstances, and the UK government's response will be directed at those who are struggling the most to pay their bills. We want to make sure that we help the people that need our help, but we also want to make sure, and I have no doubt that the Chancellor will make this announcement, we want to put forward a set of measures which stimulate business and now allow those companies, large, medium and small, to employ people, to pay them and to stimulate the British economy. And more details will be coming out, I have no doubt, when the Chancellor makes his announcement a little later on this week.
James Cleverly, thank you very much indeed.